Right. The outcomes from today will be to describe reflective practice, to understand its drivers and its benefits, and to consider different types and models of reflection that are available, and also to have a little demonstration of how to carry it out, overcome barriers to reflection, and some information about reflective writing, which you may have to do, and also some consideration of academic reflective writing, which may also be something that you may have to do. So, what is reflective practice? Now, I'm hoping that you had an email with the definition sheet on it, and it is available on the website as well. So, there are various definitions of reflective practice, and to do with the way that it's a way of looking at yourself. Sometimes people mention it being in a mirror, or maybe also to put yourself in the position of other people. And the definitions on the sheets, I think, are useful. But in addition, it can be said to be a way of raising awareness of why things have occurred, to examine your experience, to look for the possibility of other explanations and other ways of doing things, to make sense of events around us, and as I say, thinking of things from the point of view of another person, also looking more deeply under the surface, not just taking all just what happened and I felt bad, but trying to analyze the experience to learn from it. And that's a really important thing. And with many reflective models, the learning outcomes from the experience are a key part of it. And I think you'll find that that will be dealt with during the course. So, right. So why do you need to do it? Now, the Nursing and Midwifery Council do require it, and for allied health professionals and other staff, it is recommended by the Health and Care Professions Council, and though both of them offer support and guidance on their websites. It obviously can help with the day-to-day stresses of being a healthcare professional, and it is part of training for healthcare professionals as well. And indeed, for people who will be on apprenticeships, it will be part of it. So if you've not done it before, then it certainly will be that things that you will be required to write, it will be critically reflective, and hopefully this will help to give you a bit of an introduction to the practice if you've not done it before. So now the requirements for nurses, allied health professionals and others, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the NMC, their revalidation requirements from 2016 is 5 written reflective accounts to be part of CPD, Continuing Professional Development Feedback. And I won't linger on that in case neither of you are nurses. It is based on the update of the NMC code from 2013, which emerged following the Francis report for Mid Staffordshire, which came out in 2013, which some people, if you've been in the NHS for a bit longer, you may remember that was the really big report that caused a lot of people to think about changes. That was the one where people were found to be literally dying of dehydration because the water was beside their beds and people weren't being given it, and that sort of thing. And it was a really serious bit of soul searching for the NHS, the Mid Staffordshire report at that time. The Healthcare Professionals Councils encourage reflective practice as one of the CPT activities to be used for evidence when renewing your professional registration. And there's some useful information about that on the HCPC website. And just to have a think about the HCPC website, mentions that reflection plays an important role in healthcare, bringing benefits to service users, and they mention fostering improvements in practices and services, and also assuring the public and healthcare professionals that they are continuously learning and seeking to improve as well. And actually, reflection can be said to be related to experiential learning. And that's the process whereby you have an experience and you review and describe it, and then you analyze it to draw conclusions from it, and then plan the next steps, ideally considered as a continuous learning process, and you can immediately see the comparisons with the reflective process as well. The statement on the HCPC website makes clear that professionals should be encouraged to reflect and given time to reflect also. So, where can you do it? You can carry it out as an individual, and somebody mentioned at a course I went on earlier this year, because librarians are also encouraged to do it, that it is possible on Word on Office 365. So on www.office.com, Word does have a dictation feature on it. So you could reflect and then actually talk out loud if you're not too embarrassed to, and it will be able to dictate. So that might save a bit of time with your reflection. It could be done in pairs with a critical friend, and that would be really useful when you're just starting out. It could be part of a mentor and mentee discussion. And again, that would be important when you're starting out. And it could also be a one-to-one or facilitated group supervision discussion. It can also be part of an audit, and healthcare professionals often have to do some sort of clinical audit, radiographers certainly, a QI meeting, quality improvement. And in this trust, the quality improvement team are very active, and they do run a lot of projects. And if it's something that interests you at all, then I would look on the intranet under quality improvement or QI, and also have a word with your line manager. Meetings, obviously. It can be done at work or at home, and it can be written or verbal. So there's all sorts of different ways to do it. The recommendation is to make it a daily habit. It is personal. There isn't basically a right, wrong, or way to reflect. It's what works best for you. That's really important to emphasize. It's what works for you. So you need to clarify the purpose of your reflection and then reflect when you're most ready. Because obviously it's something that was a negative experience, it can be uncomfortable. So you might need to leave a space between the experience and your reflection if you decide that that experience was suitable for reflection. And really important to emphasize, it's not all, it doesn't have to be all negative. It really should be positive. Allocate time for it and create your reflective records, because certainly when you're revalidating, your reflective records will form the basis for your CPD reflections. And really important, and I will mention this later on as well, about respecting the rights and privacy of others and the principle of confidentiality throughout. Now, as mentioned before, in healthcare professional training, reflective practice is often taught, and it is taught quite often as part of critical thinking. And that is the art of asking and answering questions to get to the truth systematically, and asking the right question at the right time in the right sequence. And both these techniques try to deal with matters as they are and not how we'd like them to be. And there is information on the handouts that I've sent. And critical thinking, if you think about it these days, lots of people, yeah, they don't really critically think, do they, in the way they should, including politicians, in my opinion. Anyway, types of reflection. There are different types of reflection. There's the clinical reflection, when that can be done as part of your day-to-day activity. Self-reflection, which can be done alone or with the support of your manager. And you could, for example, keep a reflective journal and discuss it during your supervision meetings. So your self-reflection could be related to your clinical reflection. The self-reflection, I suppose, is more related to staff reactions, for example, thoughts, behaviours. So it's more to do with you, whereas the clinical reflection would be more to do with the team overall. Now, self-reflection can be said to promote healthy relationships with yourself and with others. And those who are self-reflective benefit patients by practicing the art of caring. So that's the idea. And those who self-reflect can be said to have more capacity for empathy, self-awareness, and also emotional intelligence as well. And that's something that I suspect that if you go on some sort of formal course, you will come across that as a quality related to leadership. So the clinical reflection, as I say, could be about an event during the clinical day, and it can be a really useful tool for development for novice critical thinking skills. Back to critical thinking, as I mentioned. It facilitates active learning as well as professional growth in a non-threatening manner. And then there is the team reflection, which could either be related to a subject or to an event. And it's helpful to be done to discuss an event. For example, if there was a complaint or an incident, and it is closely linked to debriefing, which, as you may be aware, is normally carried out after a traumatic event. So both really need to be facilitated correctly so that everyone gets a say. And things like domination and blame and emotional reactions are dealt with in a suitable way. There is a type of team reflection that is used in this trust once a month, Schwartz rounds. And if you haven't come across them, they are advertised on the team bulletins and they are also advertised on the intranet, and they happen over a lunchtime period, and they are often related to experiences and feelings and providing a structured forum whereby any member of staff who is present can come together to with others to discuss the emotional and social aspects of working in healthcare. And there is quite a useful website with Schwartz Round's details on, and there is a Schwartz Round recording on it. It's based in a hospice, but I still think it's quite a useful example of how a Schwartz Round works. And if you get any time during the day, during a lunchtime, when a Schwartz Round is happening, well worth some time going along, I think. Now, it's really important to emphasize that reflection doesn't have to be formal. And I've got various things on the slide there. It can be done as a personal journal, and there is a book which you've got a copy of that helps to facilitate that. You could do it online as a blog, perhaps as a mind map, whereby various concepts are linked together with connectors. So that can be helpful to put it down in a sort of graphic form. Poetry, not really me, but it might work for you. Photography, storytelling. So there's lots of different ways to reflect. Now, Donald Schoen, who wrote a book as long ago as 1991 called The Reflective Practitioner, How Professionals Think in Action, and that is still in print and it is also still available via your local library service. He divided reflection into two grand divisions. Reflection in action, which is the one for us all to aim at, which is during the event, where you're able to think about the experience yourself as it happens and decide what to do and act immediately. And that's the one to aspire to as a healthcare professional. Now, the one that most of us are reduced to doing, certainly initially, is reflection on the event afterwards, where you think about something that's happened, what you might do differently, and how new information could have influenced feelings and actions. Now here I've got some reflective models and frameworks, and the two of you, you may be aware of some of these. Right. Please, if you let me know if you haven't or you have in the chat. I've got an eye on the chat. That might be nice. Gibbs reflective cycle, that's probably one of the best known, and it's based from educational psychology literature. Graham Gibbs, Learning by Doing, published as long ago as 1988. And the nice thing about that one is it's fully available as a textbook on the internet, and you can just Google it. So it really makes it easy to get hold of if you need to. And I'm just going to have a look at the chat. Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Okay, Julia, if you've not heard of them, that's fair enough. Possibly, others may do so. Johns's model for structured reflection, that's not a cycle, that's like a sort of a grid, and that is one related to nursing. Oh, thank you, Virginia. You know of Gibbs, yeah. Johns is Christopher Johns, and that was originally published in 1994 in the Journal of Clinical Nursing. And all the references to do with these are in the chat. So, not in the chat, sorry. They will be in the handouts and also on our website. Gary Rolfs, he also he had a nursing background. He published a framework in 2011, and this was based on something by a chap called Terry Borton, who also was part of the educational psychology kind of area. And Terry Borton wrote 3 questions, a very simple cycle of 1970, and I call this the teenagers framework because it's sort of what? So what? Now what? So I think the thing is that it's very simple. And Borton Rolfe framework, if Gibbs for any reason doesn't work for you, Borton Rolfe might, it may not, and try another one. And there are quite a few others. And I have noticed in recent writing that some of the student nursing associates are now using a technique called patchwork texts, whereby you take reflections and you relate the reflections to maybe a favourite film or a favourite creative kind of work. And that might be quite a good way of kind of if this is as boring as anything to you, maybe that might, the patchwork. And if you're interested, I can let you know more about that later on. So no one framework is the right one to use. It all depends on the individual. So the Gibbs model, it's basically broken down into 6 steps. It is research-based, it's formal, it is straightforward, systematic, and also well structured. And it allows for a clear description of the experience and leads you through the different stages to make sense of the experience. But there is a big but, and I have had people commenting on this quite a bit. It's got detailed steps in it. It's overlapping the steps, and you might find that a simpler framework is easier to use, or indeed something completely different. So also with Gibbs, it's cyclical, so you don't have closure. And sometimes closure's really important, particularly if you've had a traumatic experience. Now, having said that, cyclical with Gibbs does mean the last part of Gibbs is the learning bit. And actually, as a very bright nursing associate said to me a couple of years ago, actually, it's not cyclical, because if you end up in the same place you started with, that learning has not taken place. What you need to do is end up forward. So it's not really cyclical. I would say it's more kind of like a helix, like the DNA helix. You need to sort of go along and end up in a different place to where you were at the start. And there we are. There's good old Gibbs. And now, apologies to Virginia, we will be doing Gibbs and with a scenario. Hopefully this will be useful to you, but I will mention Borton Rolfe as we go along as well. So what I'm going to do is play a little scenario which was written by a healthcare professional, so it should be reasonably close to some truth. And then we'll go through the Gibbs reflective cycle. And I'd like you both, if you can, to either feedback if you're brave enough to unmute, or post results in the chat so that I can sort of comment on it. So, okay. So, right, here we go. I'm going to play this, and I hope that you can hear it. do let me know if you can't hear it in the chat.
Good morning. I'm here to assess you for a hospital bed. The GP's asked me to visit.
Oh, okay. The doctor said I need to think about bringing a bed downstairs and maybe a commode. I am worried because he must think I'm not going to be able to get upstairs soon. I didn't think I was that unwell.
Let's hear about what equipment we can get to help you. I just need to do an assessment on the laptop first. So how's your mobility at the moment? I am managing to potter around the house at the moment. I use a stick. I hope that I will be still able to get upstairs for a bit longer. I want to carry on sleeping in my own bed. Let's get you a bed for downstairs, just in case you need it. And how's your husband managing now that you're not able to get about so well?
Well, he's been very good, running about after me and helping me around the house. Oh, I just wish I wasn't so dependent on him. Sorry, I can't really see you over that laptop.
Okay, so where do you think we should put this bed then? What about over there in the corner? That looks like a good spot. You'll be able to see the TV from there and then see what's going about in the house.
Oh, okay, yes, but I'm really worried about what will happen if I can't get around. How will I manage?
Sorry, the computer just froze. Oh, don't worry. We'll get you all the equipment you'll need. It'll be fine. Loads of people have a bed and a commode downstairs anyway.
Oh. Okay, so I hope you got the gist of that anyway. So we're doing the first part of the Gibbs cycle. So I'm hoping that you might be able to respond either, as I say, through if you unmute, but obviously we are recording, or if you'd like to type something in the chat. So have a think about where and when did the situation happen, and why was the healthcare professional present? Who else was involved? And you have to think a bit outside the box here. So who else is mentioned in the scenario? And there is a script for the scenario, and that is on one of the handouts. And there is a comment at the bottom of the script as well, which might be worth having a look at too. And think about what happened and what did he or she do and what did other people do and what was the result of the situation. So can either of you, I think okay, right. Lovely. Thank you very much, Virginia. I've got at an individual house, the person was told by the GP, the healthcare professional, to go round there. He didn't introduce himself, didn't explain his role, and the lady was alone with her husband out. Yes, good summary, I think. Does Yulia or Virginia, do you have anything else that you wanted to add to that? Because that, I think, is a very good summary of the scene as it is. Yes, thank you. They made assumptions about the lady's health without fully assessing. Yes, I think that is a very good point. Do either of you have anything else to add at this point, or shall we move on? I think probably bearing in mind time factors, if it's okay with you, we'll move on. So think about thoughts and feelings of the healthcare professional and also of the person concerned, the patient, also the patient's husband, also possibly the GP. So what did the healthcare professional and the patient feel before the situation took place? What did they feel while the situation took place? And what do you think others felt during the situation? And bearing in mind, again, you'll have to make a guess on some of this. And what did the person feel after the situation? And what do the people concerned and others think about the situation now? And given that the patient's husband actually if you see on the handout, there was a complaint made by him after the actual situation. And so obviously it would appear that he was not happy. So do you say either of you have any observations about the feelings of the health? How do you think the healthcare professional reacted? What do you think their thoughts and feelings before, during, and after were? Right. Okay. Thank you, Virginia. She said that the lady, the patient, was very anxious and by the end of it wasn't reassured. She was ignored. She didn't want to understand why she needed the equipment. Yes, very good points. Do you have any thoughts about the healthcare professional? Maybe the GP surgery? What about the GP? Any other thoughts, anyone?
Um, Hi, Janet. Yulia
Hello,
here.
Julia. Yeah, do you
Hi.
have any thoughts?
Yes, I just wanted to say that it felt like at first when we joined the conversation that I understood that it was a health professional and he was asking what seemed to happen, but I felt like he didn't really took notice of lady's feelings or where it happened. He was distracted by the technology. Um, it wasn't the great outcome for the lady.
Yes, I thoroughly agree. Um, that is the case that the healthcare professional seemed very kind of wrapped up in his own thoughts. Yes, and also, yeah, that is the distinct lack of sort of fellow feeling, I think. So that's the second stage of the Gibbs cycle. Now, the Borton-Rolfe cycle, this step one, what happened and the thoughts and feelings, that would be part of what. So that's Borton-Rolfe is simplified into what. So moving on to how thinking about how the incident impacted on the healthcare professional and the patient, and that will lead us into the evaluation section. So, was the experience good or bad? Have a think about that. What was positive and what was negative about the situation? And actually, there were a few things that were positive. I think it's important not to be completely down on it. So what went well and not so well, and in what way? And I think here you both will probably begin to appreciate what a lot of people comment on, where Gibbs can be quite repetitive. So what has the healthcare professional learnt? What has the patient possibly learnt? What about the patient's husband? What about other people involved? Given that the healthcare professional said that he was told by the GP to turn up and the patient didn't know that he was coming. So there's all sorts of things. Yes, thank you. The healthcare professional, says Virginia, did not seem to have a full understanding of the situation. Good point. So what did the people involved do to contribute either positively or negatively to the situation? Thank you, Yulia. Yulia's written, the start of the conversation was positive, but the outcome not so much. Quite. So that is, as I say, that's the evaluation. Do either of you have anything else to add to that? So you're starting to think here, you're starting to go beneath the surface and think about the situation as a whole, not just what happened, but why it happened, what was positive and what was negative. And we will deal a little bit with this later on. Um, and I think one of the things is positive is, yes, the healthcare professional turned up. Yes, a conversation took place. And yes, there was an outcome, but it wasn't the outcome that was suitable in terms of the patient. And it didn't leave the patient in a good place. Was it the right outcome, says Virginia? Thank you. Yes, quite. Yes, I think that is highly debatable. And here with step 4 of Gibbs, you begin to analyze more deeply. So what sense can you make of the situation? Why was the event positive or negative? Try to explain the causes and consequences of things that happened during the event. Again, you're going to have to extrapolate to think outside the box a bit. What could have been done to avoid negative consequences or improve positive consequences? And bearing in mind what we've just said about the patient, the lady being on her own, and also the healthcare professional turning up more or less unannounced, does that give you a few ideas? So was the healthcare professional's part useful? Now, I've got here, have you been in similar experiences? That would be to encourage discussion, but I don't think there's really enough of us for that. But if anybody is brave enough to unmute and have had some sort of experience, please do so. That's absolutely fine. So, and
Oh,
what
Janet,
has...
sorry, I
No,
just wanted to let you know. I felt like a health professional could have asked some questions for the lady because he clearly didn't heard some of her story, so he could have asked a couple of questions.
absolutely. And thank you, Virginia, that the person should have written or called ahead with an appointment. Thank you. That's great. Hit the nail on the head straight away. And what has the healthcare professional learned from the experience? So have a think about that as well. There's quite a lot of learning in this scenario for quite a few different people. So that's the analysis. Do either of you have anything else to add in terms of that analysis? And here with the Borton-Rolfe cycle, we're dealing with, this is the so what, this is the why bit. So the evaluation, the analysis in the Borton-Rolfe cycle, the very simple one, are covered by the so what. And now we're going to move on to the conclusions. So once you've evaluated the situation, you can start to draw conclusions about what happened. So what do you think did the healthcare professional learn about him or herself, negative and positive? And as a result of the complaint, yes, there was a bit of soul searching, and we will hear and read about that a bit later on when we come to the written aspect of this. So have a think about what that, and if you'd like to unmute or pop something in the chat. Now, what skills do you think your healthcare professional might need in order to avoid or improve the outcome of a similar event? Have a think about what sort of skills might improve that outcome. What could they have done differently? Yes, thank you. A person-centered approach. Yes. Isn't that something that younger health professionals should be trained about? It's supposed to be core, isn't it? And as someone said to me earlier, it would appear that the healthcare professional sort of had abandoned their dignity and empathy and compassion, awareness training as well. Okay, and any other thoughts? What barriers might there be? That's a good one, isn't it? Think about barriers. So, not to assume without the full facts. Yeah, good point again. So think about possible barriers and the strengths and weaknesses of the healthcare professional's practice. Again, this is something that will be dealt with a little bit later with the writing, but if anybody's got anything to add, that would be really nice. Okay, anything, anyone? Okay, I was an eye on the time. I will move on. And with the Borton-Rolfe cycle, this bit, step 5 and step 6, this is the now what. So this is the moving on bit. So I've got so what here, but so what really is almost part of now what. There is a bit of overlap with the different stages with Borton-Rolfe and Gibbs because it's so, Borton-Rolfe is so simplified, whereas Gibbs, the breaking down is helpful for some, but it does mean you do have an amount of repetition. And really important, did the healthcare professionals' experiences Did they meet any competencies or learning objectives? And you might say, well, I don't have to deal with that in real life. Yes, actually, of course, as healthcare professionals, we do, don't we? Particularly if we're on a course of learning of some description. Now, having dealt with the conclusions, we now, with Gibbs, good old Gibbs, we come to our action plan. And this is where you need to improve your knowledge, ability, and competency and sum up the whole thing. And a bit of subdivisions here. So think about what specific training or shadowing or knowledge does your healthcare professional require? And I think we've started to think about that, haven't we? So what areas of development should they prioritise? What do you think? Something in the chat or unmute. And even if the experience was positive, what could they do to improve it more? And what steps do they need to do to reach that goal? And that's where your learning objectives would come in for your competencies. So anybody got any suggestions on that, either in the chat or what sort of training do you think that healthcare professional might benefit from? Bit of communication training, possibly? Anything else? Any thoughts, anyone? Communication, listening skills, reflective practice. Yes, thank you. Brilliant. Yes. And as Virginia said earlier, a bit of person-centered communication as well. And also there are implications for the way that that meeting was not organised. There's some learning for the wider team as well, which again will be considered a little bit later on in the write-up. To be empathetic, yes, great, yes, that could be. There are courses around for healthcare professionals, and I'm thinking here of one called Sage and Time, which is actually occasionally run in this trust itself that would help with this type of thing. So finally, you have to think, but what else could the healthcare professional do to be more prepared in the future? So maybe there's some reading or maybe some shadowing they could do, perhaps. Have a think. Anybody, any suggestions? I think I need to move on at this stage, but bear in mind, if anybody's got any ideas, please let me know. So that basically is working through a scenario using the Gibbs cycle, all 6 stages of it, and with reference to the Borton-Rolfe, and the final part, the conclusions and the competencies and learning objectives and the action plan. That would be part of your now what? So, and the website is here, but we will be moving to our new website. So how did it feel using that model? Does anybody have any thoughts about that before we move on? Did anybody find that easy to use, or a bit repetitive perhaps, or overlapping? Was that helpful at all? Anybody? Any thoughts? Yeah, repetitive. Oh, not very helpful, says Julia. That's a good point. Oh, very helpful. Yes, I think that's the thing. If you're new to it, Gibbs can be really useful. If you've used it before, then the downside of Gibbs can come in and it can seem a little bit tedious. And certainly I have trained this course before several times, and I do think, oh, here we come again. And it might feel for people listening that there's, oh, dear, yes, we're revisiting that. Anyway, so now we do have some examples here, and these are also on the handout. If that one didn't work for you, these are some really quite nice examples. The first one comes from the Association of Medical Royal Colleges, and it is aimed at doctors, but it's a nice short little written one, and it is a reflective practice example. It's nice and brief, and it uses Gibbs. So there's also this video by a student physiotherapist who I think must have got bored with writing his reflections down, and he put it in a video, and It's about 9 minutes long, and it's just quite nice in terms of it doesn't have to be written. So it's just an example of a different way of doing it. You can do it as a blog. This is a Belgian offering from a student physiotherapist. Again, he obviously was at Brighton University, and again, it's another example. Now, I've put Jennifer Moon at the bottom because Jennifer Moon is an often quoted writer about reflective practice. Her stuff doesn't work for me, but it could work very well for other people. And she has written an awful lot, quite a lot of it in about 2007. And her writings are referred to on the website and also on the handouts. And she sort of sees reflective practice in terms of a scenario in a park. And she also refers to things like Harry Potter and reflections in a bowl and things like that. So again, if today or other models don't work for you, try Jennifer Moon. And she certainly offers scenarios that may not necessarily be specifically healthcare related. So more examples. Now, I include this one because it is from the Royal College of Nursing website, and it is related to the NMC's revalidation. But you know what? It's really nice, this one. It's about how a nurse working in the community was able to take a situation at a care home with a client who had a lot of problems, was basically very lonely, and also there was some equipment that apparently nobody knew how to use at the care home. And this nurse was able to take this situation and discuss things with her multidisciplinary team. And as a result, she was able to make a real difference in the care home, which was great. And also, as a end of things, she ended up actually doing a presentation at a Royal College of Nursing conference. And she actually wrote things down as well. And she developed tools related to loneliness as well. So it's a really nice one, that one. And it's just another different way of seeing how a revalidation reflection might be dealt with. So now, blocks and barriers to reflection. Now, I don't offer an answer to all of these, but I can just raise them and mention them. So, self-motivation. So maybe, hopefully, tools and techniques as mentioned in these sort of sessions, these courses might help. And again, if this doesn't work, there's plenty of other things referred to in the handouts. Lack of knowledge and skills. Again, I'm hoping that what's on our website and the handouts will help to enhance that. Resources, time. Well, in the library, we can't give you time and we can't really help with staffing, but we can offer you a space where you can go and do your reflection. And if you want to work on a written reflection, we do have computers where you can work. Now, Colchester Hospital Library is actually closed at the present time, but we are looking actively for alternative accommodation, and there are 2 study rooms at Colchester that are open. And Julia, if you have anything to add to that, please advise me. But otherwise, as I say, certainly Ipswich, the library is open, and Colchester has got space and there are computers, albeit the library itself is not available at the present time. The organisational culture, that can be a barrier. I don't think it's a particular problem in this trust, but it can be. And also fear of being judged, that can be a barrier as well. And from a personal point of view, I can certainly think of an experience I had where I have reflected on it, but I would be reluctant to discuss it openly because I think that would be a problem. So yes, maybe choose your reflections carefully under those situations. And maybe when you do reflect, try and find a situation where you're confident that people will not judge you. So now, this is the latter part of the course where we're going to talk about reflective writing, which has been described by somebody called Melanie Jasper in 2013 as engaging in and completing the reflective cycle using the processes of writing as an instrument to help you learn. And obviously, it's something that a lot of people have to do as part of an academic course. And I would say that Melanie Jasper's book, Beginning Reflective Practice, again, it's available in libraries and it is a nice one. So a summary, breaking it down a bit, is the idea of reflective writing is to record an event or experience and also learn from it from different perspectives and give evidence of your reflective thinking. It helps you to engage in the deep learning processes in terms of the evaluation, and it helps to enhance other forms of learning, and it should contribute to personal and professional development, i.e. things like revalidation, I meant. Now, I've got here some useful phrases for writing reflectively, and I think all of them would be useful. And there is, if you've got to do academic writing, the University of Manchester actually have something called the Academic Phrase Bank, which you may have heard mentioned in other courses, that again would help you with different phrases. And you got them there. I thought, I felt, I realized, I noticed. That's when you're doing your starting, recording what happened. Your feelings could be covered in I was uncomfortable about, I did not question, I was aware, I was unaware. And then when you're starting to analyze at the time, looking back, I now see. And then moving on to those deep learning processes, having realized, having learned, having observed, having discussed, having applied, and that would be your evaluation stage of Gibbs. And then finally, when you do your conclusions on your action plan, you've got I now feel, I now consider, I now question, I now know, hopefully I now wonder, and I will need to, and that's where you put your action plan. And I've emphasized underneath, rather than describe, you need to evaluate. And I've got here 3 examples of reflection. So we've sort of got before, during, and after. And I'm hoping that the 2 of you or anybody else on the call will be able to get an idea of what's wrong with this first one. So about a week ago, I went to see Mrs. X about getting a bed and a commode for her downstairs, which is what her GP, Dr. J. Jones, said she needed. I knew her mobility was poor because her doctor had told me this, and she was having problems getting up and downstairs. I don't really know why people have to live in such unsuitable houses, but it wasn't my business to say this. I was short of time, but asked the key questions. Her husband was out at the time, or not around anyway, which was strange, considering she said he was really good. I expect he got fed up with her dithering about. I got a rather muddled response, and the lady seemed to be working herself up into a bit of a state, which was completely unnecessary. I think she might have had a bit of Alzheimer's, as she did not really understand that the GP had clearly said she needed a bed and commode downstairs. Basically, if she didn't, there was a good chance of her ending up in the ED with a #NOF and needing a protracted LOS. And I was able to reassure her that having the equipment to hand was something that lots of people did. And the person says, I don't really know why the complaint came through, except to say that her husband, Jim, is a difficult person at the best of times. So have a think about what might be wrong with that. And we will be visiting that a bit later on. So this is the example later on, and this is where it's been tidied up a bit. And I'm not going to read every word, but so the first thing is they talk about seeing an appointment to see Mrs. X and about anonymizing the details. They mentioned the visit was organised in advance by the GP. Whoops, that was an assumption, and communicated to her and her husband by the admin team, which didn't happen. So they now understand this should have been checked before they arrived. They were told to do a quick assessment about getting a bed and a commode downstairs, and they comment about the husband not being present, but mentioned they did ask how he was managing. So that's something that's positive. They would have been better if they'd spoken to him directly, either with the patient present or before. and they mention the computer and more about reading beforehand. And also they're talking about their communication and listening skills, and they mention their feelings of annoyance because it seemed they weren't listening. The patient wasn't listening to them. In fact, they should have been listening to the patient. They didn't question the suggestion that a downstairs bed and commode would be the best arrangement for the patient, and that has been commented on. Thank you, by the two of you. And they were unaware of the confusion and distress about an uncertain future. And they mention that they were poorly informed and their actions at the time didn't improve the situation. They've got hindsight and talking about it would have been better if they'd contacted the GP before the visit or just after to discuss alternative options. Then here, in the latter two paragraphs, they talk about speaking to the line manager about the need for better communication within the team. They've asked to shadow one of the occupational therapists when they next carry out a patient assessment. So this is definite action here. And also, they've booked to attend a trust-sponsored communication and learning course. And also, the e-learning for health portal does have an e-learning module on person-centered approaches, and they're going to have a go at that as well. They've done some reading about trust guidelines on record keeping and the importance of dignity and compassion. They've also looked at some websites, and they now know that information is available from organisations like the Disabled Living Foundation. And they also now know that Mrs. X and her husband could have applied to their local council for a home assessment and help with possible alterations, such as an extra stairwell and suitable adjustments in the bathroom to help maintain the patient's independence. So what they're planning to do, their intention is to prepare a leaflet listing the information and local details to give to patients and families or carers when having this type of discussion in the future. So I'm hoping that you can see the difference between the first and the second one, where there's some analysis, some consideration of other points of view, and some definite learning outcomes and action plans. So, any comments? What do you think is the difference? Anyone? Anybody like to add? I mean, obviously on here, I've got the second one has got more depth than the first one. There's an analysis of the situation in the second one with an awareness of the change in their perspective. And it wasn't just description. And the multiple perspectives of others were taken into account in the second one. And also some thought about how the learning from the incident will impact in the future. Do either of you have any other comments at this stage? Yes, thank you. Professionalism is considered. Anything else? Anyone? What about that sentence with all the abbreviations in? Did either of you have a guess about what that meant? Yes, there's prevention of a previous incident. Yes, either of you. Okay, I'll move on then, but have a think what you think about that sentence with all those abbreviations. Now here, I've got some examples, some more examples. There's a nice article in the Nursing Standard, which uses the Johns model. The British Dermatology Nursing Group website, the second one, that's a nice one, a published article using Gibbs, and the NMC website, which has some really nice examples on. I've referred to it earlier, but it's well worth a look at. Even if you're not a nurse, it will give you some interesting examples. And there is also at the bottom, I've got a really nice YouTube video. This is not an example as such. What this is actually a course of about 36 minutes long, as offered by Rebecca Rowe, who is a colleague at Patworth Library at the hospital. And if this course doesn't work for you, try that. because that's much shorter and you can sort of stop it as you go along. And again, it comes with learning. So another option for you. So things to avoid in writing reflection. So avoid too much or too little detail. And if it's not your own personal diary, try to avoid writing too informally. Now, I know that for some organisations, they're actually fairly happy with informal, but if you're doing an academic course, in many cases, unless you've been given guidance by the university, it's probably a good idea to try and be reasonably formal. But you know what? I've seen several recently, actually, the reflections themselves were informal, but the commentary on them was written in a formal style. Do what your organisation that's looking after your studies requires you to do, basically. Avoid moralising or being judgmental. That first one, wasn't that a bit judgmental? Also sarcasm or irony or know-it-all. Use humour with great care, because you might think it's very funny, but it might actually be offensive to somebody, for example, from a different culture, or indeed the person concerned may not get the joke. Avoid revealing confidential information about patients, colleagues, or yourself. And I hope you noticed that in the first reflection, the healthcare professional was guilty of 2 breaches of confidentiality, one with the name of the person's husband and 2 with the name of the GP. So, and also avoid using obscure jargon and abbreviations. And that sentence that I mentioned, that actually translates as basically the person would, ED would end up in the emergency department with a hash NOF, which is a broken hip, as in broken neck of femur, and also a protracted LOS is a long length of stay in hospital. So that basically, what I'm saying is, try to avoid that sort of stuff, because you might understand it, but your reader may not. Anyway, now I'm just finishing up here with academic reflective writing, where you have all of what was talked of above, plus some other things. So with your academic reflective writing, you have to demonstrate the ability to apply the theory and also show your familiarity with the relevant literature. And it's really important to connect the literature with your experience. Reflect on your practice and how aspects are relevant to the literature. And if you use a particular model of reflection, then yes, you will need to cite that model and have it in the reference list. If you went on a course, for example, is that course evidence-based? Can you find a study that mentions the efficacy of that course, maybe in relation to patient care and outcomes? If so, why not include that study in your academic writing, refer to it and have it as maybe there could be a quote from that study. It shows that you've done reading around your reflection. Show your learning and make recommendations. And that, of course, is important in terms of the end paragraph in your academic writing. And with reflective practice, it is, yes, you can use the first person singular in writing. I know it's different in academic writing, but you can use the first person singular in reflection in general. But again, do what your university guides you to do. So, well, here we have an academic example. And again, I'll just go through it fairly briefly. So the first paragraph gives a definition of critical reflection with a reference, and then mentions that this particular reflection was done using the Gibbs cycle. Now, with your reflective account, you don't need to include your workings in the Gibbs cycle. What you need to do is the outcomes as a result of your reflection. That's what you would push forward into your writing, and you need to actually refer to the fact that the Gibbs cycle was used as a tool. Then the reflection comes in the case of this, and you've got the anonymization and a reference in terms of that. And this is actually very simple in terms of it resembles the second one, but it is the second one with the addition of suitable quotations and references to the literature. So, for example, there's a mention of the importance of good communication as part of compassionate care, as emphasized by Gould et al. With the reference, and this is using the Harvard system, and I followed the guidelines of the University of Suffolk. So if anybody's using something different, my apologies. And again, I've got a mention here of a secondary reference in terms of the value of listening and questioning in demonstrating the engagement between a professional and a patient. And I've also got reference to a study about empathetic listening behaviours from the point of view of the patient. And I've also mentioned the concept of patient-centred care, which, thank you very much, Virginia, was referred to earlier, and I've done a reference there. The person concerned has referred to McCormack and McCants, who have written quite a key text on person-centred care. Then the second part of the reflection discusses the questioning that didn't happen in terms of the healthcare professional, and then talks about in more detail the outcomes and the plan that they're putting in place with references. So they refer to the information available from the Royal College of Occupational Therapists in detail with the reference and an accurate reference. And they also mention the course that they're booked to attend, which is a Sage and Time course, and with a reference to that, and also the person-centered approaches. And it discusses, they've done some reading from a book about record keeping, and also they have talked about dignity and compassion and read up about that as well. And again, you've got more mentioning of the various sources that they've used to gather their information in order to prepare their leaflet. And then finally, at the end, they have that critical reflection. At the end, the final paragraph sums it up about the identification of some weaknesses in practice, both with implications for the team and for the individual, and about how a suitable action plan was generated. So that's your ending of, in this case, what is moving towards an academic example. It isn't perfect, but you know what? It's at least giving an example of how that might be done. And that's all the references, and they are actually accurate, or they were at time of writing. So some more examples. The University of Birmingham have guidance on reflection with extracts. The Southern Cross University in Australia, they give different levels of reflective examples, which are actually useful, but I wasn't sure about copyright, so I haven't used them here, but I do refer to them. And this one, the third one, is actually an example of an article that was published, but this is actually a draft of it. So you can see where the person's gone through and crossed bits out and made changes. And then finally there, that one is the British Journal of Nursing. That is quite a high level article on that. Right, well, the library can help. We have lots of books on reflective writing, and that's our searchable, the website for our catalogue. If you have any queries about models, for example, do get in touch and we can help with that. And if you have a reading list, send us your reading list, or if you need to source any documents in full text, do let us know. We can source those for you. We can offer training on searching the literature if you require that. And if you're doing something related to maybe guidance, we can do literature or evidence services searches to support your practice. And also we can help with referencing. So if you get stuck on referencing, your university or your academic institution should have some guidance. Failing that, do get in touch and we can help with individual references and more generally as well. That's our contact details as updated. So we're available through the intranets, the new website coming soon, and also there are emails for the individual libraries, and there's our secure email, which is a joint email at the bottom. And you can also follow us on Twitter and tweet us as well if you'd like to. Anyway, finally, thank you for staying with us.